Good day, listeners. Reporting live on the complexities of justice, we ask. Can a seemingly simple crime, setting a house ablaze, unravel profound legal questions about intent, consequences, and the very reliability of eyewitness accounts years down the line?
It's a tough question.
What happens when victims retract their sworn testimonies long after a conviction, especially in a case involving the tragic death of a child? And how does our justice system weigh these later statements against what was said under oath initially?
That's the crux of it, really.
Let's delve into a Supreme Court case that grappled with these exact issues. People of the Philippines versus Nestor Dolendo y Fediles, also known as Etoy, that's GR number 2230098, decided back on June 3rd, 2019.
A really compelling case.
Our mission today is to unpack this widely discussed case. We'll look at the key facts, its journey through the courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court's final word.
Yeah, this case, it really puts the challenges in our legal system under a microscope, especially, when dealing with time passing and how reliable memory is, particularly under stress.
Absolutely. It makes you think about how courts handle these conflicting stories, the initial testimony versus the later take-back.
Exactly. How much weight do you give each?
So let's paint the picture. The incident itself happened way back on September 18th, 1996. This was in Sitio Capatagan, Barangay Capse, Aroroy, Masbate.
A terrible event, a fire, and tragically, 6-year-old Leonardo Perocho Jr. died from massive burns.
And the person accused was Nestor Dolendo, or Etoy. The charge was serious, arson resulting in death.
Right. And the trial court proceedings, well, they really hinged on the eyewitnesses. Dialina Perocho, the little boy's mother, her testimony was central.
What'd she say happened?
She described this terrifying sequence, hearing the accused Dolendo shouting at her husband, Leonardo Sr., then seeing Dolendo with a gun.
Wow.
Yeah, she ran upstairs, saw him setting their porch on fire using dried coconut leaves. Just awful. In the panic, she jumped out the back window with 3 of her kids.
But not Leonardo Jr.
Tragically, no. She said she forgot him. He was asleep inside. She also mentioned there had been a previous fight between her husband and Dolendo, suggesting maybe a motive. Something about gold panning.
And there's another witness.
Yes, her son, Jesse Perocho, he was 18 at the time, he testified too, said he saw Dolendo light a torch, again, coconut leaves, and set the house on fire.
He saw it happen directly.
That's what he said. He admitted being too scared to do anything, which, is understandable.
And the medical evidence?
It backed them up. Dr. Conchita Yulande's postmortem confirmed the cause of death was massive burns. Very severe, as described.
So what was the defense? Denial, I assume?
Pretty much. Denial and alibi. Dolendo claimed he wasn't even there. Said he was in Bulacan.
Bulacan. That's quite far from Masbate.
It is. He did admit knowing the family his mother employed the father, Leonardo Sr., and he admitted that, yes, there was a misunderstanding about gold panning.
But he denied the arson.
Completely. He also argued that the witnesses couldn't have possibly identified him properly from where they were in the dark under stress.
Okay, so the trial court hears all this. What did they decide?
Well, the ruling came down quite a bit later, September 23, 2011. The trial court found Dolendo guilty of arson with homicide.
So they believed the witnesses.
They did. They found Dialina and Jesse's testimonies credible, consistent. They rejected the alibi defense, basically calling it weak and unproven.
That was a sentence.
Reclusion Perpetua. Life imprisonment, essentially. Plus damages P75,000 civil indemnity, P75,000 moral damages, and P30,000 in exemplary damages.
But the story doesn't end there, does it? There was a twist.
A major one. The defense filed for new trial, and the basis. Affidavits of recantation from both Dialina and Jesse.
They took back their testimony. After all that time.
Exactly. Dialina now claimed the fire was an accident started by a kerosene lamp. Completely different story.
And Jesse?
Jesse's affidavit said he wasn't even there when the fire happened.
Wow. So what did the trial court make of that 15 years later?
They weren't convinced. They denied the motion for a new trial. They pointed out, look, it's been 15 years. That's a long time. It raises questions about why now.
Makes sense. Reliability issues.
Right. And they also noted that these new stories didn't really address all the other evidence that came out during the trial. It wasn't a complete picture.
So, rejected. The case then goes up to the Court of Appeals. What happens there?
Okay, so on appeal, Dolendo's side pushed the same points again, argued the original testimonies were inconsistent, said the recantations should lead to acquittal. They also brought up a procedural issue.
Which was?
That the judge who wrote the final decision wasn't the same judge who actually heard the witnesses during the trial.
Okay. And the prosecution, the OSG.
The Office of the Solicitor General fought back. They argued any inconsistencies in the original testimonies were, like, minor things, trivial details that didn't change the core fact of identification.
And the recantations.
They argued those were unreliable. Too much time had passed, and like the trial court said, they didn't cover everything. The OSG actually suggested something interesting, though.
What was that?
They recommended modifying the conviction, not arson with homicide, but simple arson.
Interesting. So what did the Court of Appeals decide?
Their decision came on March 18th, 2015. They affirmed the guilty verdict but agreed with the OSG on the modification. They found Dolendo guilty of simple arson.
So they agreed he set the fire, but maybe didn't specifically intend the death in a way that made it arson with homicide.
That seems to be the reasoning, yes. They upheld the factual findings about him setting the fire but changed the specific crime classification.
Which brings us to the Supreme Court. The final stop. What did they say?
The Supreme Court decision, June 3rd, 2019, basically upheld the Court of Appeals, guilty of simple arson.
So they agreed with the modification.
Yes. They looked closely at the law, Presidential Decree 1613, the new arson law, specifically Sections 3 and 5 dealing with penalties, especially when death occurs.
What are the key elements for arson again?
Two main things. One, someone intentionally set a fire. Two, you can identify the accused as the person who did it. The court said the corpus delicti, the fact that a crime happened, the fire, and that it was intentional was proven.
And they still believe the original testimonies, despite the recantations.
They did. The Supreme Court really emphasized the weight of that initial positive identification by Dealing and Jesse. They pointed out how consistent and firm they were during the trial, even under cross-examination.
The reasoning being
That, at the time, their main motivation would have been seeking justice for their son and brother. There wasn't a clear reason then for them to lie and point the finger at an innocent person.
and the inconsistencies the defense raised.
The SC considered them minor, trivial matters, things that didn't really shake the core identification of Dolendo.
What about the alibi? Still weak?
Very weak, according to the SC. They reiterated it's generally the weakest defense unless you can absolutely prove it was impossible for the accused to be at the crime scene. Dolendo didn't manage that.
And the recantations got dismissed again.
Yes. The Supreme Court took the standard judicial view. Retractions are viewed with, let's say, extreme caution, especially post-conviction.
Why is that?
Well, the thinking is they can easily be influenced, maybe through pressure or payment, and fundamentally it makes the witness look like they lied under oath at some point, either initially or in the retraction. Plus, they agreed the affidavits didn't tackle all the trial evidence anyway.
Okay. And the issue about the judge who wrote the decision versus the judge who heard the testimony.
The Supreme Court said that's perfectly fine. It's established practice. A judge can rely on the written record, the transcripts, the evidence presented to make a decision. They don't have to have personally heard every word spoken in court.
Got it. Now let's circle back to that modification, simple arson, not arson with homicide. How did the S&E explain that distinction? It seems crucial.
Very crucial. They cited another case, People versus Malgin, to explain the difference. It really boils down to the main objective, the primary intent of the person setting the fire.
Yeah.
So if the main goal is just to burn the building or property and someone happens to die as a result, that's simple arson. The death is sort of absorbed into the arson charge.
Right.
But if the main goal is actually to kill a specific person and you use fire as your weapon, that's murder.
And there's a third scenario.
Yes. If you kill someone first and then use fire to, say, cover up the crime, destroy evidence, then you've got two separate crimes, murder or homicide, and arson.
So in Dolendo's case,
The Supreme Court concluded his main objective was the arson itself, burning the house, not specifically killing Leonardo Jr. Therefore, modifying the charge to simple arson was the correct legal step.
even with the modification, the penalty stayed the same.
Yeah.
Reclusion perpetua.
Yes, because simple arson, especially of an inhabited house like this, still carries that heavy penalty under the law, and no specific aggravating circumstances were proven to increase it further, nor mitigating to decrease it below that range.
So the damage is awarded to the family.
The SC upheld the P75,000 civil indemnity and P75,000 moral damages. They actually increased the exemplary damages to P75,000 and added P50,000 in temperate damages.
Temperate damages.
Yeah, that's awarded when there's definitely been a financial loss, but you can't prove the exact amount. Sort of a reasonable estimate. And all these amounts would earn 6% annual interest until paid.
It's such a complex case with so many layers. Considering everything, the huge delay, the awful tragedy, those recanted testimonies,
Mhm.
what does this case really tell us, maybe, about the challenges of finding justice,
Yeah.
about memory, truth, trauma in our legal system here?
It really does highlight that balancing act, doesn't it? Courts trying to find the truth years later, sifting through conflicting stories. You see how memory can be fallible or how maybe external factors can influence people over time.
Yeah,
It underscores why those initial statements, given closer to the event, often carry so much weight, and why overturning a conviction based on a later retraction requires, well, a very high degree of certainty that the retraction is true and the original testimony wasn't.
absolutely. It leaves you thinking. So for you, our listeners, what part of this deep dive stood out most? We'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and takeaways in the comments.
In this case, it really reinforces some key legal ideas, doesn't it?
Definitely. Like positive identification, how powerful a clear, unwavering ID from a credible witness can be.
Right. An alibi confirming it's usually the weakest defense unless you can prove impossibility.
Then there's retraction courts just don't trust them easily, especially after conviction. They don't automatically cancel out earlier testimony.
And the competence of the deciding judge, a judge, can make a valid ruling based on the records, even without presiding over the whole trial.
Finally, that crucial distinction between arson and arson with homicide murder. It all hinges on the perpetrator's main goal. Was it the fire itself or using fire to kill?
Key takeaways, for sure.
If you found this deep dive valuable and you want to keep unpacking these kinds of intriguing cases and legal points, make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive.
We try to bring clarity to complex issues one case at a time.